my God, Becky, look at those brakes. They're just so big.
This video today is all about brakes on the 2020 to 2022 Shelby GT500. I've actually shot this video over the last year. That's why you're going to see a mix of yellow and red calipers throughout this video. A lot of the delay had to do with trying to get a successful color change on my calipers. I wanted yellow versus red, which I thought would work better with my rapid red paint. The first attempt was a total fail, and the second attempt was done professionally. That process took a long time. That's at the end of this video, but my car has 6,000 miles on it. I'm on my third set of brake pads, multiple brake flushes, bleeding, bedding. So I've been involved with these brakes for quite a bit. In this video, we're going to start with the numbers, look at the numbers of weights and measurements. Then we're going to get into the calipers, pads, changing pads, the brake fluid, bleeding the system, rotor turning or resurfacing, brake bedding, and Caliperflexion, which is a cool mod for the front calipers, so you can change the pads without having to throw away the one-time use bolts each time. And then finish up with, like I said, a color change ×2, the last one being successful. So thanks for watching. Here we go, all about brakes. We're going to take a close look at the brakes. Here is the complete second set of brakes that I bought for this car. These were moved about 1,000 miles or 1,500 miles, something like that. Yeah, there's the front calipers, got the pads in them, rear calipers. The smaller rotors are obviously for the rear, the big ones in the back, or big ones up front. And we're going to take a look at the weights, sizes, and talk more in depth about them. Well, first off, let's talk materials. These are massive two-piece rotors. I've got a magnet here. As you can see, the center is not steel, it's aluminum. That is steel right there, the big rotor surface. Same with the rears, two-piece aluminum. And if you didn't know, the calipers themselves, these are aluminum. You can see the magnet doesn't stick. And the massive pads, which I got to flip over to look at. All right, first of all, the pads inside the rotors themselves. You can see how monstrous those front pads are. I'll get them out here in a second. And it's worth noting too, because I'm going to do a mod here to change that. The rear calipers are kind of like the front calipers over there on my 2011 GT500. You can do quick change of the pads out through the top. The massive front calipers, you cannot do that. You got to remove the calipers, which are their one-time use bolts that have to be replaced. But I have a mod that I'm going to do on that to having to keep replacing the bolts as well. Talking weights, the front rotors weigh 42.6 pounds each. That's a total of 85.2 pounds for the two front rotors. The rear rotors weigh 20.8 pounds for a total of 41.6 pounds for the rear rotors. Rotors all told weigh 126.8 pounds. The front calipers weigh 21.6 pounds for a total of 43.2 pounds for the two. And the rear calipers weigh 10.6. For both of those, it's 21.2. So all told, the calipers weigh 64.4 pounds, and the lump sum total of the entire brake system, you know, calipers, rotors, and pads, is 191.2 pounds. With the big weight of the rotors on this car, you're going to get people saying you should really switch to carbon ceramic rotors. You know, basically I say if it ain't broke, don't fix it, so to speak. These rotors were designed for this car. This whole braking system was designed for this car. It is essentially heat proof. I've had my car out on the track a couple times. I've driven Ford Performance's cars a few times on the track. all day long, full gas, full brake, zero heat, soak for the engine, and zero brake fade for these awesome brakes. Yes, they're heavy. This massive steel disc can absorb and dissipate a lot of heat. Carbon ceramic, rotors, untested for this car. You may have some good qualities, but it may also have some bad qualities. But I know that these, in fact, work like a champ on the track. And I was at a small car show yesterday, and one of the guys was saying, hey, you really should switch to drilled and slotted rotors for this car. And then, again, I explained, I've had this car out on the track. It is absolutely flawless on the track. The brakes are insane. Out of all the insanity that this car has on the track, the brakes are at the absolute top. So they work great. Yes, they're heavy, but man, do they work. All right, more information on the rotors. We're going to put a tape measure on there. This is the rear rotor, and it is a 14.5-inch disc. The front rotors are 16.5 inches. Taking a look at the width in millimeters, basically the rear is a 30 millimeter, and the front is a 40 millimeter. Measuring the calipers, this is the rear caliper, and it is basically a 6-inch wide. It's kind of hard to get on exactly on there because of that structure right there, but 6 inches wide by, looks like 10.5 inches long. The front caliper, now there is a little part that sticks out there wider, but from the bottom lip across is 7 inches, and it goes out to about 7 3/4 complete width when you account for that area that sticks out there. Length of the front caliper, I would call that about 15 inches. Something interesting with these large 6-piston front calipers, first off, this is the bottom here with that line on it. This would be the top side. The pistons are not the same size front to back. So this front one is 36.5 millimeters. The middle one is 34.5, and the last one, which is the downside with them on the car, it's upside down there, but it's 30.6 millimeters. So big to small, top to bottom. Getting ready to pull the calipers off. I've got a catch base underneath there, and I am going to, on both the fronts and the backs, just to remove the bolt right there and the brake hose. The backs have hoses that can be attached. Let's go take a look at that. Right here, so you could disconnect it there, or you could do it on the back side of the calipers, and I'm gonna disconnect it right there. These caliper bolts back here are one-time use bolts. That's a mod I'm going to do now. To take those off, it's a T60 bit right there, and I'm going to get out my socket. The rear caliper bolts, which are kind of hard to see, but right there, that gray one center screen and down below it, those are 18 millimeter. And I just use a socket and a dead blow or a mallet hammer. To remove the brake hose off the front caliper, right there, that is a 1/2 inch bolt. So loosen that up, and I've got a bin to catch the brake fluid as it's coming out. I got the first caliper out, and as you can see what I did there to prevent all the brake fluid from draining out, and I am going to flush my brake fluid anyways, but just to keep it from becoming a big mess and actually possibly get an error in the ABS system, I just wrapped a saran wrap or so around it and put a rubber band on it. Measuring the thickness of the new pads, these are the rear pads here. The actual pad material itself is about 10.5, we'll call it. The whole thickness, including the steel plate there and that backing plate there, is, I had to use both hands for that, but it is 17, we'll call it 17.5, and that's the whole thing, including the backing plate there. These are the front pads. The actual pad material itself, the wear part there, not the backing or steel part, backing plate, is a little over 10 millimeters. And the whole thickness, including the backing plate, is, we'll call it 17.7. And that's, the entire thickness to include the backing. Take a look at the markings on the pads. This is the rear pads here. Ford Motor Company, FYY, looks like OA, or Oscar Alpha. And then I believe that's an FER446/2FF. All right, you can see the numbers there, FER 444, it looks like 8/2 FF or Foxtrot. Ford Motor Company. Fox, Yankee, maybe Oscar Alpha. After getting both pads out of the fronts, then we got this retaining spring that comes out right here that clips onto the top portion of the caliper. And as long as we got the pads out, we're going to do some measurements. So the rears look like they're about 4¼ inches by, we'll call it 2.5 or so. And the fronts, which as you can tell are way bigger, they are 7.5 by, we'll call it 3¾ inch. I just took a break and looked at the workshop manual because I haven't worked with rotors or calipers like this before. It looks like you'd want to take these out, but the workshop manual doesn't talk about that. It just says to just lift the pads out. So I'm assuming we have to push them in off of these studs here, and then slide them out the bottom. And that, yeah, there we go. Just push them in off that and slide them out the bottom. There we go. Removing the pads from the rear caliper is pretty easy. Just tap out these pins and they come out through the top, and you can do this with it on the car. Okay, so I tapped this pin, and now I can get it just by pulling on it. And that's under tension with that spring there. I'm trying to use one hand so I can film with the other, but you can press down with the spring to relieve that tension, which let's see if I can get it. There we go. Yep. Got that off. And then these pads just come out through the top with it in place on the car. All right, I get asked quite a bit on when to change pads, especially for my track buddies. We hit the track pretty hard. You can see my pads are kind of white there, but right there you're looking at the brake wear indicator, also known as the Singer. And I changed my pads just before that contacts the rotor, to score the rotor. And it's just kind of a judgment call if you're getting ready to do a track day, like I am. I'm getting ready to do a track day here in a few days. My fronts will last. My rears I just changed out. Haven't even been on the track yet. They're brand new pads. Do another brake job on the carbon fiber track pack. When you're taking the pads out, you don't need to remove these pins here. They can stay in place, these guys here. You got to get the caliper out, obviously, to get access to the bottom. And I did remove the spring retainer, this here, just to clean it up. I still got to clean it a little bit better. But and then I clean up all these slider areas here, clean up the pins, and then put a little bit more brake grease on there. Got on my brake grease and greased all four of these sliders. Also greased the sliders that are on the spring, as well as those pins. Make sure you get the outer on the outer, outer from the engine, so to speak, outside of the car, and the inner on the inside. When you put in the new pads, they're going to be thicker than the old ones, obviously. That's why you're swapping them. And they're not going to go back on the rotor unless you get the pistons to go back in. I just take my hammer here, the soft side here, stick it in between the pads, and work the pistons back, prying it top and bottom, and I'm able to get the pistons back in. Be careful doing that to all four. You may overflow your reservoir, master cylinder reservoir up top, so you may want to do a couple and step on your brake pedal and do it again. Since you're taking off thin worn brake pads and putting on thicker ones, I use the brake pads here, the old ones, and press over the pistons, and then stuff something in there to hold that side while you pull on the other side and press them out. That way I get the pistons retract and give you room for the new thick pads. Talking brake fluid, the car comes with DOT4 high performance brake fluid. I'll see people post online, oh, you really need to switch to this high temp fluid or this track fluid. This fluid works like a boss at the track, and I'm getting ready to bleed here. But I have had the brakes just literally smoking, stand on the brakes all day long, no fade, brake pedal's always there, so I just keep sticking with what works. This stuff is good. And then the question I get asked is, how much does the system hold? It is not listed anywhere that I can see. So when I'm bleeding, I put 2 jugs of the brake fluid in there, which are 1 pint each. Put those in my motive, and I just bleed each of the 4 corners. There's 8 bleeder screws. Bleed them and get fresh fluid out by the calipers. It's time to talk bleeding. I'm gonna bleed the brakes again. I had 2 intense track days at Coda. Brakes got super hot. I'm just gonna bleed them again before my next track day. There's a couple different ways you can bleed them. You know, you can press on the brake pedal, have 2 people, 1 person opening and closing the bleeders, or this is a solo job, nice and easy, the motive brake bleeder. These 2020 plus GT500s require the European adapter, and that makes it nice and snug on the cap there. The motive, you pump it up. I've got my pressures written here, 15 PSI to check, empty 20 PSI max when bleeding. And this is my little homemade receiver. So I just got a jug, put a hole in the top. This is 1/4 inch inside diameter tubing, and that fits nice and snugly on the individual bleeder screws. You know, having this submerged in the fluid down in there keeps it from sucking any air back up into the system. Talking order of bleeding. Basically, you want to go from farthest to closest. You know, our master cylinders are up on the front left side here, so this way would be the closest. Going to start in the back right corner, the passenger corner. That's the farthest from the master cylinder. I personally bleed the outside bleeder screw, then the inside, which is the farthest and closest. So it's back right or passenger right corner, driver back or left corner back here, passenger front over there, and finish up right here by the driver's front. The bleeder screws themselves, 168 inch-pounds. And another trick I do is, let's see if I can get this open here with one hand. When you're done bleeding, you're gonna end up with fluid inside this little hole here. And when you get to the track and get warm, that kind of squirts out and gets hot. I jam a little end of a wooden toothpick down in there and use a paper towel around here to soak it up. So I get the brake fluid out by jamming in a little wooden piece of toothpick. Obviously don't break it off down in the hole, but that helps get the fluid out of there. And then don't forget to put your caps back on there. And then after, the first good brake application or first drive after bleeding, I always come back and, clean up any residual stuff that comes out of there. But if you follow those 2 things, not much is going to come out there, if any at all. Okay, so I take the end here. I got my car up high on the lift, so I got to climb up a little ladder here. And let's see if we can see that there. Just screw this guy down tight. You're screwing onto plastic, so it's not like you have to put a wrench on it and get crazy. There's a rubber seal, but I just make it snug. That should be good to hold pressure right there. And then I got to put brake fluid in there and pump it up. Normally when I bleed, I'll put 2 of these bottles, 2 pints in the bleeder. But I bled these recently prior to my Coda track, and I'm bleeding them again after the Coda track event. So I think what I have, like 1.5 bottles here. I'm going to start with that, bleed a little bit on each of the 8 bleeder screws. And let's see how we're doing on the level. I'm right here. You don't want to go below the pickup and send air up into the system, so I'll be keeping an eye on that as I go around the corners to bleed. Let's see if I can do this one-handed, but there you go. You just pump this guy up. You got a pressure gauge right there. And like I said earlier, you take it up to 20 PSI max while bleeding. I got it pumped up just shy of 20. You'll see the fluid is pushed up into the lines. And that's sealed, not leaking right there. It's common to see air in the line up here. That's not a big deal. That's normal. But, and there's obviously air at the top of the master cylinder reservoir there. All good, the fluid pickup is at the bottom. Back at the first place here to bleed is the passenger rear. I've got my bleeder set up here. Here is my 1/4 inch inside diameter tubing. Just press that on. It's got a secure enough fit. There's no pressure there, it's just coming out. Other tools here you're gonna need are 11 millimeter, and this is, I think these are called line wrenches or brake line wrenches. You don't want to use a box head because you'll end up rounding the edges of the bleeder screws, about 11 millimeters is what you need. Loosen this guy, and let's see if I can do it one-handed and get flow coming out. There we go. And you see the brake fluid coming out. And that's gonna collect down into this jar over here. And while that bleeds a little bit, here is just a little piece of wooden toothpick. I jam that down in there when I take the tubing off. When it's time to take off this tube, I always wrap it with a paper towel and catch it. This brake fluid is very bad for paint. You got these nice painted rotors, or nice painted calipers. Don't want to get the brake fluid on there, which eats into the paint. So wrap it up in a paper towel here, pull that off. It's a two-handed job, so I got to put the camera down. Got the tube off, and this is where I jam down in there, but I need the other hand because I pinch this towel around there to keep the fluid from going down onto the paint. Got my small, much more sensitive torque wrench here set to 168 inch-pounds, and just go until it clicks. There we go. Then lastly, I have some Simple Green. I put the cap on there and Simple Green clean up the caliper in case any brake fluid got on the paint. And move on to the inside, outside to inside. Got the outside one all cleaned up with the cap on there, and moving on to the inside. Don't forget to go check your bleeder, make sure the pressure is good and that the fluid isn't getting too low. Just push air up into the system. When you're all done with the side, just make sure you've torqued both of these down to 168, put your caps on, cleaned it all up, wiped it all down, make sure there's no residual brake fluid on anything, and move on to the next one. So after the passenger right or rear, we're gonna go on to the driver's side, left rear. Just wrapped up the driver's side, made sure everything was clean and torqued down, caps are back on. We'll take a look at, I've done the two back sides. And I started with maybe 18 PSI, so I'm still above 15. I'll give it a few pumps, get it closer back to 20. How long does this project take? I've done it many times on this car now with tracking it so many times. I'm just a handful of minutes per corner, so it's a pretty quick job. If you're a first timer, it may, maybe take you an hour or two. I'm just kind of figuring it out, but this video should help you. On to the monster front brakes. This is the passenger side. Same as the back, even though, the calipers are different, but, same size bleeder screws, same torque, same everything. I go outside to inside. And I probably let the fluid flush just a little bit longer in the front because the brakes get really hot in the front, as most of your braking energy is up front on these big bad boys. Just finished with the driver's side front. All the system is bled. Still had pressure on there, only pumped it up one time in between. And I started with 1.5 or so pints, and I'm down to here on that. And it's important to note I'm not doing a full system flush, fill, or replacement. I'm just bleeding a little bit, getting some fresh fluid down by the calipers after 2 intense track days. And then in my little homemade holder here, liquid, the brake fluid is maybe up to here. I've got some duct tape on there to keep it stuck to that platform there. One last thing is I slowly open the cap here to bleed off the pressure. A little bit of fluid in the line here. Double check your reservoir level. There's a cold fill line right there. And then when you go to take the European adapter cap off there, use a rag so you don't drop any brake fluid on anything that's painted. But that's it. That's brake bleeding on the 20 through 22 GT500. Time to talk about rotor turning or resurfacing the rotors. I replaced the front brake pads after my COTA weekend. They were pretty much gone. The rears still have a little bit of life left on them back there, so I haven't swapped those yet. I did see a lot of surface irregularities, hot spots, deposits on the rotors, so I wanted to get them resurfaced. I initially took them to O'Reilly's and we measured them, and they would not do it. There's not a lot of excess material on these. If you look at, let's see if I can find it in the light, there's stamping on the aluminum center hat there, and it says right here, minimum thickness is 38.0. All right, so here's the numbers from the brake guy that just did them. So they come 39.88 on one and 39.89 on another one. And asked them just to take off the absolute minimal to clean up the surface. And that's what the numbers finished out as 39.16 and 39.10. A brake guy was able to do this for me, and he asked if he wanted me to cut down through to remove all the cracking, as you can see there. I told him no, and I'll post a picture here of before they were turned to show you how much cracking there was, but they came out nice and clean. Yes, there's some little bit of cracking there on the rotors, but I got them super hot at COTA. And the other one is already on the car right here. Then the first drive, I need to also mention, he said to wash them in super hot water with a scrub brush and Dawn dish soap, which I did. Got off all the deposits, and first time I drive the car, I'm gonna go through a brake bedding procedure again. Taking a look at the width in millimeters, basically the rear is a 30 millimeter, and the front is a 40 millimeter. Time to talk removing the rear brake rotor to, if you need to get it turned or replaced or whatever. I'm gonna get it lightly turned. So in order to do that, you gotta take the emergency brake, electric emergency brake caliper off. You gotta take the hydraulic regular brake caliper off. Set something up to hang them. I've got some hangers here. But right here, you need an extension to get to that socket or that bolt head back there. And I've got this is a 13 millimeter. You don't need the extension on the top one, but bolts on the backside there, bolts there. These can be reused. These bolts on the caliper, I had to use a breaker bar. These got a lot of torque on them. I'll show you the torque settings here in a bit. These are one-time use bolts, torque to yield. So these guys are, I think that was an 18 millimeter. Let me double check that. And that is an 18, yes, millimeter. And I had to use this big breaker bar to break it for both top and bottom. And then gonna remove those, and the caliper or the rotor will slide right off. Okay, got the calipers off. You can see where I hung them there. The e-brake here, the electronic brake, parking brake, I ended up having to switch to a ratcheting wrench because that bolt and nut there is in the way of the socket as you're backing the long screws out. These are the screws that come out of there. So I switched to one of those guys there, worked like a champ, and that is a 13 millimeter. And now the rotor's just sitting on here loose. It'll come off nicely and go in and get turned. Got the passenger side all put back together. So these bolts back here on the e-brake, emergency brake, are 35 foot-pounds. I converted them to inch-pounds times 12, 420, because then I could now test it with my little inch-pound torque wrench. And then replace the pads on the rear and put the one-time use bolts back in on the back there. And those are 103 foot-pounds. 103 foot-pounds. Torque those down, one-time use bolts. out for my initial drive. The brakes, it took quite a few pedal pumps to feel pressure. You know, when I first started up the car, I pumped them quite a few times and I felt good pressure. And yeah, I did bleed them. You just got to do that to get the pedal feel there. Now out bedding the brakes. First of all, I probably don't even need to bed the brakes because I use the same pads. I just put them on different calipers, but move them around. I just want to go through the brake bedding procedure and also want to check that my new brake setup is working. You'll find various recommendations for brake bedding. You know, there's some that'll say go light, you know, for a while, and then medium for a while, and then heavy for a while with cool downs in between. Some will just say do quite a few moderate brake, you know, slow downs. That's kind of what I do. I usually pick about 30 medium speed to, you don't want to come to a stop. So, you know, anywhere 40 to 60, you know, get on the brakes moderately. Like here I'm doing 50, there's 60. You know, on the brakes moderately down to 10, 15, speed back up. And just rinse, repeat. I'm in my mode based on sport, so it's real aggressive on the downshifts. But another thing I did off camera was after the first handful of brake applications, I came to a stop and I did a visual inspection, make sure there's no brake fluid seeping. Radar detector. Make sure there's no brake fluid seeping out of the bleeders. Make sure there's no brake fluid inside the wheel wells. And I was all good to go. Got them all snug down nicely. So I'm gonna go out and bed them. Do quite a few stops, like I said. And I'm gonna take it back to the house, let it cool down. And then I've got a track day again in 2 days. I may take them out and get some real good heat in them. Do some heavy braking on the streets just to check them before I go to the track. So that's it for the brake bedding. All right, the brake stud mod says to basically chase the threads to clean them out from thread locker, and it warns about using a tap because it can actually cut the threads and mess them up. I just took a bolt that I got at the hardware store, cut it with my Dremel to put some notches in there, and I'm going to drive it in there, screw it in there, and unscrew it a couple times to clean it out. Well, I drove that bolt with the slots in it into both the top and bottom. Drove it all the way in, all the way back out, and then blew it out with an air compressor, and a lot of debris came out of there. So it was good to clean out. First stud's going in. I've got the blue supplied thread locker on there, the double jam nuts that are supplied. It says to thread it down until it bottoms out. And this little collar right there, which has blue Loctite on it now, it's hard to see, is about an 1/8 inch. Which yeah, doesn't bottom out. It says no more than 5 foot-pounds of torque. And to measure up to this collar, and that is 3 7/16. So I'm gonna get my tape measure and measure that. All right, the first stud is in, and it says to measure 3 7/16, and that's perfect. And it talks about, the instructions talk about this end not bottoming out, so don't try to force it. Just 5 foot-pounds of torque once it's bottomed out. Looking at this Caliperflexion mod, if you see the 12-point nut right there, that's the nut that comes off. There's a washer behind that. If I see the bottom one here a little bit better right there. And you'll need a 12-point socket for that. I'll show you what I got. Here we go. It is a 9/16 12-point socket. Goes on there nicely. That's a 1/2 inch drive. And for the torque on these, I've had these off many times. I use a breaker bar. There's a short stubby extension, and put a little force on it, And then I can take over with a ratchet. There we go. There is the nut. And if I can get my hand back there to get the washer, nut and washer on both the top and bottom. Once you get the nuts and washers off, you screw these guys on there. These are the extensions. And these little end pieces here are just to keep the ends from getting dinged up. You unscrew these. They're just protectors, set them aside, and screw them onto the studs. Make sure it's all the way down, fully seated. You don't have to put a lot of pressure on it. It's just an extension. Just finger snug. Right there, and for the bottom. Got both the top and bottom. We'll see if I can slide this caliper out one-handed. While I hold the camera with the other hand. This is normally a two-handed job. There we go. Caliper's coming out. And then, you slide it all the way out to the ends, which I'm not going to do because I'm not changing pads right now. But then your pads come out the bottom after you, release the clips up here. Let's see if I can get a light in there. Yeah, on the pad changing part here of this video. Look at that. Push those pads in over those pins, and the pads come out the bottom. To put these studs back together, put the washers on top and bottom. Don't forget those are critical. And then you got your 12-point nuts. Thread them on by hand. Snug them down, get out the torque wrench, and I do them dry, no seize or lubricant, anti-seize or lubricant. Got my digital torque wrench on here. Set to 100 even, dry stainless steel. There's the vibration. So for my color changing project, I've got these things completely cleaned, and then I taped up everything because and that is sealed with plumber's tape and a bolt, but I am going to try sandblasting these and see how they come out. The brake calipers are coming back off for version 2.0. So what I did looked great for cruising to car shows around town. Turned out really well, like the look. However, the intense heat at the track has been baking the brake dust into the paint, even though I did high heat, primer, high heat paint, high heat clear, and I put ceramic over top. The brake dust has just been baking onto the yellow And all the brake dust remover, wheel cleaner, engine degreasers, all those do not remove the brake dust. The only thing that does get it off is brake clean, which, you know, this rattle can paint is really soft and the brake clean just eats it up. So they're going to come off for version 2.0, and I'm going to have them professionally done. While these calipers get reworked, I am putting on my original red calipers again, just so the car is functional. I may have a track day coming up here in the next day or two, so I gotta have obviously brakes on the car. But just put that one on. It's not snugged down yet, and I gotta connect all the brake lines, which I've had sitting for a week, wrapped in plastic and rubber bands to keep the fluid from all draining out. But I got some new crush washers for all four corners, and the one-time use bolts for the rear. The fronts have the studs. Well, that's it. That's the brake video. Thanks for watching. Hopefully you guys got something out of this. See you next time.